afternoon of the pandemic that hit us on Monday. Now, if I try to remember that, when this was, what day it was supposed to be happening. That was, 5 days ago. Wednesday. Which now is, 5 days ago. Incredible. When it happened Wednesday, I'm always usually immediately there. And that helps many of these bugs because they had mutated. Bugs mean, I'm referencing insects that kind of serve as a marker for certain things in the environment, like ants in area or something, not within my home, mind you. Now, my father-in-law, Sugar Daddy, got an early look and was chilled by some of the findings of the McKinsey Global Institute and its report. The one that was released on, Wednesday, midweek of this last work week. And among them, these findings, new jobs are quickly drying up. Consolidated data from job websites finds postings have declined by 1 million since February, a drop of 16%. New COVID-related jobs in healthcare and warehouses aren't enough to offset sharp declines. Low-wage, part-time, and minority workers are the most vulnerable. 3/4 of all vulnerable workers earn less than 40,000 United States dollars a year. Minorities make up 25% of the newly unemployed, a full quarter of them, even though they're just 20% of the workforce. The virus may be killing older people, but job losses are hitting the young. Workers under the age of 35 account for almost half of all job losses. The education divide is widening. Workers sans bachelor's degrees are twice as likely to be vulnerable as those with degrees. Interestingly, the Institute finds significant overlap between the jobs at risk because of the pandemic and those it has already found were at risk over the next decade due to automation. So there we have that for the moon. That's what it can reflect upon. Now, workforce transitions we thought might take years have suddenly taken on new urgency. Or so observed McKinsey's Susan Lund, who noted that ups the need for training and reskilling programs that help the tens of millions of vulnerable workers not only get through today's challenge, but also put themselves on a better footing for the future. Well, there's no place to go but up by now. Automakers had an especially difficult time because of plant closures and reduced demand. Ford says it's lost $2 billion United States dollars because of the crisis, and Tesla, which was banking on a banner year, will probably post a narrow loss. If automakers have it bad, the airline industry has it worse. Southwest posted its first operating loss in 11 years. Meanwhile, a White House economist predicted jobless rates in these United States could hit a crippling historic high of 20% this summer. That would be the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. This means larger companies and those with more debt can tap into funds to limit damage from the coronavirus crisis. Now, when I think about this program, the program will now accept applications from companies with up to 15,000 employees or up to 5 billion United States dollars in annual revenue. At the same time, the program will welcome smaller companies. The Fed said the minimum loan size will double to $1 million US. The move comes after national restaurant chains such as Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris were slammed for participating in the Paycheck Protection Program, protection, not projection, which was intended to aid small businesses. Unlike the Paycheck Protection Program, loans from the Main Street program are not forgivable. It's still unclear when the program expansion will even launch. Now, Jared Kushner is, of course, prominent among optimists making rosy predictions about how soon and how quickly the American economy can reopen. So who's right about the economy? Jared Kushner or the chairman of the Federal Reserve? Jared Kushner was up early on Wednesday, midweek this last work week, to offer his opinions about the coronavirus crisis to the hosts of Fox and Friends, his father-in-law's favorite morning show. And Kushner virtually crashed the internet with his claim that the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic is a great success story. He also made some rosy predictions about the reopening of the economy, saying that by June, a lot of the country is going to be back to normal, or should be back to normal, and adding, the hope is that by July, the country's really rocking again. To be fair to Kushner, he isn't the only optimist. The stock market, after plummeting in March, has recently jumped about 30%. Well, was it this month or the last? I think it was this. No, wait. This one was Friday, and then we had the weekend. So it was last month, last work week, and Wednesday was another up day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average tacked on more than 530 points after the National Institutes of Health pronounced positive results from a clinical trial in which COVID-19 patients were treated with the antiviral drug remdesivir. Investors are showing that the economic impact of the pandemic isn't going to be as dire as we first thought, and that large parts of the economy will recover pretty quickly. Amid all this upbeat feeling, the policymakers at the Federal Reserve completed a two-day meeting at which they reviewed the state of the economy and the impact of the emergency measures that they and Congress have introduced during the past 6 weeks. A Fed statement released after the meeting evinced none of the sunny optimism displayed elsewhere. It said, the coronavirus outbreak is causing tremendous human and economic hardship across the United States and around the world. The ongoing public health crisis will weigh heavily on economic activity, employment, and inflation in the near term, and poses considerable risks to the economic outlook over the medium term. Now, at a video press conference, the Fed's chairman, Jerome Powell, often referred to as just Jay, said that the economic activity will likely drop at an unprecedented rate in the second quarter of the year, and he said the jobless rate could leap to double figures when the April employment figures are released next week. Well, that was, of course, this last work week, wasn't it? Or, well, I mean by Monday in this coming week. His latest announcement, I'm trying to piece it into my chronological sense of time as warped by the coronavirus impact on our sense of time at all, with all of this lockdown and staying indoors. Now, let's put it this way. Even as Powell noted that the Fed's emergency actions which have involved pumping more than 2.3 trillion United States dollars into the financial system, have helped market conditions substantially. He deferred from making any specific longer-term predictions about a broader economic rebound. The depth and duration of the current slump, he has testified, are extraordinarily uncertain. And by the way, just taking a quick look into the dash, this is where Sparrowless says not many people can do a radio show in their sleep, and it's still more interesting than anything I can name. Hey, that's pretty cool. Thank you. God, I thought I did terrible. Anyhow, our man who writes in Runic, his name is just a collection of Nordic runes. Says, I'll der mein Kamerad Douglas. Where we go one, we go all, worldwide always. Give Zara Q. Oh, please don't bring up Q. Oh, God. I think my comrade, the coronavirus, is fake. This guy just does this to he's trolling. Oh, God, he's a pseudo-Aryan troll. Oh, my God. At any rate, Powell didn't explicitly say that investors are undermining the challenges facing the economy, but that it was clearly, that was clearly the suggestion. While acknowledging that economic activity would pick up as the shutdowns are relaxed, he also highlighted three risks facing the economy over the next year: the path of the virus itself, and the possibility of additional outbreaks, the possibility that rising job losses and a wave of business failures would damage the economy's productive capacity, and the very, very negative, his words, economic data from the rest of the world, which can weigh on the United States economic performance over time. The Fed chairman also expressed doubt that consumer spending, which makes up about 70% of GDP or gross domestic product, would rebound to its previous levels even after the economy reopens. He's saying, until people are confident that the virus is well and truly under control, they will be reluctant to undertake certain kinds of activities. Yes, I agree. In view of all these challenges, Powell has concluded that it will probably take some time to get back to a more normal level of employment. He also said the economy may well need more support from all of us, i.e., the Federal Reserve, Congress, and the Trump misadministration, to ensure a robust recovery. Responding to a question about some Republicans raising concerns that the federal government is spending too much money and federal debt levels are rising too fast, he went on to say that this is not the time to act on those concerns. This is the time to use the great fiscal power of the United States to do what we can to support the economy and try to get through this with as little damage to the longer run productive capacity of the economy as possible. Well, all in all, I can tell each and every one of you it was a sober assessment from Powell, who, as I noted in an earlier transmission, has generally received high marks for the Fed's response to the pandemic. Doubtless his caution reflects the experiences that Red China has had as it has eased its own lockdowns. While factories and some service industries have reopened, overall spending has rebounded slowly as many Chi-Com or Chinese Communist consumers have displayed the sort of caution that Powell referred to at his press conference. An article in the South China Morning Post yesterday last week described the Chinese recovery as patchy and piecemeal. Now, reports from a few states that have already reopened some of their businesses, such as Georgia, indicate that a similar pattern is likely to play out across these United States. And on Monday of yesterday, last work week, David Calhoun, the chief executive of Boeing, said it would take 2 to 3 years for travel to return to 2019 levels. Of course, Calhoun and Powell could turn out to be wrong, and the optimists, including Kushner and the investors piling into stocks, could turn out to be right. But seriously, who would you put your trust in? Whom would you put your trust in? Well, that's what brings us back to the fact that all economics is set by politics, not the other way around. Politics is not an end product of economics. Economics is impacted by politics. That brings us to election this year. Because this is where, as I said, will Trump pay? This is where he pays. More than half of Americans now support conducting all U.S. elections by mail, according to a new Pew poll. That's an important majority to consider as the country hurdles towards the November presidential election, with no guarantee the pandemic will be cleared by then. By comparison, in fall of 2018, only 32% of Americans supported such a measure. Yesterday's, was it yesterday? Was it Wednesday? I just have to try and find out from, let's say now, going to go on in here. If this were at in a different sense, what I can do is there we are. Was April 29th was Wednesday, 5 days agone. Yes, there we go. When I think back on that time, looking at my calendar, and basically Wednesday, I'd say Tuesday, the 28th. It was Tuesday, the 28th of this last work week, when the Ohio Democratic primary, which was delayed and then switched to a mail-in only contest, was taken by presumptive nominee Joe Biden. Biden also got an all-important endorsement from Hillary Clinton. However, the candidate is also facing increased calls to respond to sexual assault allegations leveled by one-time Senate staffer Tara Reade. Reade claims Ben Biden sexually assaulted her in the early 1990s when she was an aide in his Senate office. That was a long time ago, but I don't know if she was that young, because we all know Joe Biden likes him young. And I don't know if Tara Reade was that young at the time. I mean, Joe Biden likes him, I'd say the guy's a goddamn pedophile. He's part of the pedopathophilocracy. He's just the more normalized end of the spectrum. Now, November's presidential election is just over 6 months away, and Joe Biden says he's worried President Trump will use the pandemic to try to delay it. Now, the Constitution will be in tatters if America holds no election this year. House Democrats are planning to set up a powerful oversight committee to investigate how the trillions of dollars in federal coronavirus stimulus money is being spent. The bipartisan group will also have the ability to probe the government's response to the coronavirus crisis. Now, the committee is just one of several watchdog groups dedicated to tracking the hundreds of billions of United States dollars of aid money being distributed every day, and with some members of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. You like that? PRAC? PRAC. Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, including inspectors general from the Departments of Defense, Labor, Justice, and Health and Human Services, having already begun or soon set to begin the process of auditing the government's response to the crisis. A vital vulnerability remains hanging with the 2020 election. And as Americans become increasingly concerned by the worst-case scenarios of millions of deaths and widespread economic collapse, worrying about voting seems relatively quaint. However, if the federal election does not happen in November, which at this moment in time is not impossible, the Constitution will be left in tatters. If there be no election, President Trump presumably will entrench himself in office past next January, legally or not, despite the lack of an electoral mandate. Any electoral mandate. The lack thereof. The same would be true for those now holding expiring House and Senate seats, as well as down-ballot offices that are in play. In a time of tribulation and suffering, it be critical that we the people weigh in on the performance of our elected leaders come fall. If not, our country will become but a shadow of the democratic republic it once was. So how might a federal election not take place? Could President Trump just call it off? Well, no, at least not legally. Would Congress have to pass a law? Yes, as the general election date was established by a federal statute enacted circa 1845, and the Constitution also appears to give Congress the power to postpone elections in emergency situations. These be reasonable legal questions to raise, but they are really beside the main point. On the current trajectory, as exposures and illnesses skyrocket, Americans could be in lockdown for months. There has been little meaningful federal response to the crisis so far, with no widespread testing, no national stay-at-home order, no robust effort to ensure hospitals have the resources to care for the sick and protect medical workers, and no systematic effort to track those who become infected and to isolate their prior contacts. What this means is that the cataclysmic fallout from the coronavirus will be on the more severe end of the spectrum of disturbing possibilities. Without question, all bets are off. And just as sporting events, Disney World and the border with Canada have shuttered sans advance notice, we will simply wake up one morning to learn that it be deemed too dangerous and chaotic to go to the polls in November. An election day without voting would be without precedent. However calamitous the circumstances, our elections have never been indefinitely postponed, let alone called off. It did not happen during the American Civil War between the states, the World Wars, or after the 9/11 attacks. Under the disguise of national security, 129,000 Japanese Americans, Nikkei Amerikajin, were stripped of all constitutional right and incarcerated in permanent camps during the Second World War. But even then, they were still allowed to vote by mail. The voting process is mostly handled individually by states. Registration procedures, identification requirements, and early voting and mail voting opportunities can vary dramatically across the country. There is literally no way that this patchwork can be properly remedied in time to ensure voters in every state are duly heard this fall. Congress must take action, and for federal elections, the Constitution allows it to do so. The New York Times editorial board urged states to make voting by mail a clear and free option for every eligible voter in the country. Senators Amy Klobuchar and Ron Wyden have already introduced legislation that would ensure that Americans in every state can vote by mail without first having to provide an excuse. It would also facilitate timely election results. With stimulus spending still up in the air as to any resultant benefits, House Democrats are crafting their own investigative oversight with an anticipated committee to be launched I believe it was launched this last work week. It should include robust measures to fund and streamline education and, essentially, more importantly, right now, it should include even more robust measures to fund and streamline the election. Now, the time to get this done is now. Indeed, achieving universal mail voting is a complicated task. It could cost us upward of $2 billion United States dollars, according to the recent research by the Brennan Center for Justice. Any federal legislation would have to grapple with numerous related issues, including measures for validating voter identification, translating ballots into other languages, providing access to voters who are not reachable by mail, setting up an online cadre of poll workers to assist voters, and ensuring rejections and errors can be corrected so that every single vote be counted. Even if the election still happens in November, sans federal legislation, a pandemic could produce a hodgepodge of outcomes, such as massive disenfranchisement and skewed results, with only a fraction of the most committed voters braving it to the physical polls. If there be no president-elect come January, the invisible coronavirus will have managed to morph the Constitution itself, which has specific mandates on when the terms of our national elected leaders end. Although difficult to envision right now, this epidemic will one day be in our national rearview mirror. Let us hope that timely federal elections will not be there along with it. Indeed, the quote from Joe Biden himself, "It's a really grave situation." And he means grave, like we be dead and buried, people. Maybe Joe Biden should just stay in his basement. Since canceling his last campaign rally in the second week of March, the Democratic presidential candidate's campaign has gone from strength to strength. He gently maneuvered top rival Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, the communist, out of the race, becoming the presumptive nominee, and found his party united around him. The former vice president is in position to beat Donald Trump in November, leading polls in several battleground states, including Michigan and Pennsylvania. But he's also stuck at home, limited to remote television interviews and Zoom calls with donors. On the first edition of his Here's the Deal with Joe Biden podcast, he said, "I'm Joe, and I'm sitting here in Wilmington, Delaware, and it's a scary time." There are upsides to his confinement. His liabilities as a candidate, a trail of gaffes and questions about his age and energy aren't in the spotlight, while the 77-year-old grandpa is settled in at home, jacking off over child porn under his shawl. And Trump's wild coronavirus briefings are forcing even some supporters to conclude that the president's strength isn't crisis management, so Biden can't help but look good by comparison. It's Biden by default. Still, Biden can't deploy his best asset, sharing his legendary empathy, distilled over a life of tragedy with voters one-on-one. And he's way behind Trump's wealthy, tech-savvy campaign on identifying likely voters, since campaign workers can hardly knock on doors as Americans be hunkered down. He might also miss his chance to reach millions of Americans with a big convention speech, since cramming thousands of people into a sports arena is hardly compatible with social distancing. And good polls now will count for nothing come November. Fate has handed Biden the most unusual presidential campaign in history. His chance of winning the White House hinges on whether he can figure out a way to make it work. And here to try and close the arc of narrative tonight that we took back to Kushner and the election, just to try to give us all something to look forward to. The coronavirus pandemic could have unexpected environmental effects. There's a baffling array of predictions out there about how the COVID-19 pandemic might change this or that aspect of our existence, and it's good to be skeptical. Crisis pundits so oftentimes get these things all wrong. You should be skeptical of post-pandemic predictions. In previous crises, experts were very often wrong about what would come next in technology and business. Will we all flock back to the office after this be over, desperate for human contact, or will we have developed an impossible-to-shake taste for working from home? Will the crisis build solidarity or encourage tribalism? Will our grandkids make fun of us for perpetually wiping down delivery bags with Clorox? It's understandable we're all craving the comfort of not only an end date to the current horror, but also reassurance that we will be able to navigate the world that comes thereafter. Experts are happy to feed this desire with answers and predictions. If they help you calm your nerves or think through contingency plans for your family or business, go ahead and listen to them. But be warned that, judging by the accuracy of previous predictions, most are likely to be wrong. Beware. Can anybody hear me? Going to, live stream's offline. Holy shit. Okay, tell me if you can hear me, people. Let me know where I left off. Marcus Crick said, no, did D3 drop? Huge lag for a hit. Back on. Great, Derek Telly. How about, thank you. Where did I leave off? Good people. Where did I leave off? Let me see. Hey, Douglas, do you know anything about Marilyn Manson? I'm so bored with Trump and coronavirus. I love social distancing. I just learned to play and sing Fundamentally Loathsome. Hella fun. Marcus Cricks, of course, brings up the fact, he says, my father also finished chemo and radiation. He had bowel cancer, then blood cancer. Oh, God. Now he's all clear. Crazy. Good God. Good man. Blessings upon him. Our prayers. YouTube, nothing. I want to hear from TV DDD. Hey, Derek, hope you're recovering well. Yeah, this is DR, and DR said, I just popped my benzo for the night. Am I hearing that or only thinking it? Oh, yes. Okay, Marcus Grips. Yes, here we are. He's talking about last time they had to knock him out with nitrous at the dentist because he kept fighting back when they started raping his teeth and gums. They actually blocked that. I had to use my my sway as manager of the channel to get that back up. Derek Talley was saying Joe likes him young. Yes, I think I remember you talking about what happens when many people in Marin try to get talk therapy. Am I only imagining that? Now, let's see now. Where are we? Hi, Douglas. Would you mind going on to the subject of dental care again at some point? Ozone, fluoride, implants, UCSF dental. How should we take care of our teeth, please? Oh, my fucking God. I mean, thank God you're back, Douglas says. Oh, yes, so what happened? We went down, you seem to be dropped, resetting YouTube. Oh, God, so this is happening a lot tonight. It's all my fault. I'm like knocking the laptop around. This is the problem. I need to have a new cable, and I'm not quite sure I can get one in lockdown. I'm not sure if Staples or the local place that would sell the cables is open. So it's rather unbelievable. I've been it's all my fault. Yes, they are saying. Well, it's my fault in the sense I've got a cable with no tooth. So the cable's in this precarious position where when I move the laptop, then it knocks me out. He says, "Did I spell that wrong?" You might have. It's amazing the characters we get in chat. All right, let me try and restate where I was. Let's see if I can. Get back into thought, art, of narrative, as I say. Basically, I was saying that, predictions, if they help your nerves or they help you think through contingency plans for your family or business, go ahead and listen to them, but be warned that, judging by the accuracy of previous predictions, most are likely to be wrong. So beware of experts bearing crystal balls. Of course, that reminds me of all kinds of jokes. They used to have little cards that would say, "Soccer players have checkered balls." I mean, there you are, your experts have crystal balls. The evolution of technology, in particular, is famously hard to predict. You've probably heard about the tech executive who opined circa 1977 that, to quote him verbatim, "There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home." But his bad call wasn't a fluke. Albert Einstein doubted the atom would ever be split. Charlie Chaplin called the movies a fad. And Napoleon Bonaparte thought the idea of a steam engine was utter nonsense. Now, as Rob Walker pointed out in Medium's Marker recently, guessing how the world will turn out after a crisis be no easier. He digs into predictions that were made after both the 2008 financial crash and 9/11 and finds plenty of howlers. And one of them is this, I'll quote from his work. In early 2009, in the depths of the Great Recession, Time magazine declared the end of excess. That's what he reminded readers. A New York Times piece from the same year predicted, the recession has endured so long and spread pain so broadly that it has seeped into the culture, downgrading expectation. Other commentators agreed that the recession would cure us of out-of-control consumerism for good. Well, that clearly didn't happen. This Walker guy's got a ton of statistics to back this up if your own observations aren't enough to convince you. Another bold prediction that 9/11 would mean the end of irony seems equally ridiculous now. The point isn't that it's useless to speculate about the future or think through various possible scenarios. If you're a business owner, and I say this of course because my manageress, Lena Shea, is a small business owner, you have to be prepared for the most likely eventualities. The lesson is instead humility. The world is complex, which means making predictions with any degree of specificity be fiendishly difficult. So go ahead and weigh the opinions of experts, develop plans, lay bets, but just bear in mind that all of us have a high chance of being wrong when it comes to prognostication. Expect the unexpected and be ready to adapt. That said, there's an interesting thread of air pollution research taking place in the context of the pandemic crisis. It could just lead to one of those drastic post-pandemic changes. As Fortune reported yesterday, last week or so, drastic drops in road and air traffic and in industrial activity are leading to dramatic, if temporary, improvements in air quality. And as a new study from Europe's Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air suggests, this is having a direct impact on European people's lives. The organization estimates that the coronavirus lockdown has already resulted in 11,000 fewer air pollution-related deaths, as well as 6,000 fewer cases of child asthma, 600 fewer preterm births, and 1,900 fewer asthma-related emergency room visits, and 1.3 million fewer days of work absence. Of course, you can't be absent from work when you're working from home. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, this needs to be weighed against the health impacts of the lockdown itself, in terms of stress, lack of exercise, reduced income. But there's more. In hard-hit countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and Italy, officials and researchers are increasingly noting a disturbing phenomenon of COVID-19 death rates being higher in places that, until the crisis hit, had high levels of dangerous pollution particles in the air. The implication appears to be that air pollution weakens our defenses against a virus such as SARS-CoV-2 or CoV-2, the scientific name for COVID-19. SARS-C lowercase o V-2. Everything else being uppercase, as in severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, the mutation thereof. We already knew that air pollution is linked with chronic respiratory disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and so on, and people with these conditions are particularly susceptible to COVID-19. Of course, this research is at a very early stage, and we need to be cautious about drawing overt causal links. But if the links really are there, then as WHO Public Health Director Maria Neira told the Financial Times, the day we take off these masks, we need to breathe clean air. No way will we accept the level of pollution that we had before. We have to use the pandemic to create a healthier society, one that is better prepared for emergencies. Well, time will tell if the coronavirus crisis ends up accelerating the drive away from fossil fuels. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel, yesterday, the day before, a few days ago, let me see if I can remember exactly when she said what she said. And I'll, let me see here. Try and look up Angela Merkel's speech that she delivered. And I'm glad that you're patient with myself. Of course, I know that you don't really have a choice, so I've got you all kind of like hostage. You got to be patient while I seek out and search out that which I'm trying to relay unto thyself. There were several human interest stories of some tragedy that have been followed. A mother and her daughter basically fighting off coronavirus together. I think both of them died. So it was on Thursday, April 30th of 4 days ago, and let's see now. Yes. On Wednesday, midweek, this last work week, Die Deutschen, or the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, delighted environmental campaigners by insisting that coronavirus-related economic stimulus programs be strongly linked to climate protection. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, at the virtual summit where they were speaking, then went on to say the restart can lead to a healthier and more resilient world for everyone. So a green recovery could be a chance to kill two birds with one stone. And that forces us to analyze what the coronavirus means for climate change. It means that lockdowns and distancing won't save the world from warming, but amid this crisis, we have a chance to build a better future. Because something strange is happening. Not just the illness and the death sweeping the planet. Not just the closing of borders and bars and schools, the hoarding of wipes and sanitizer, the orders, unimaginable to most Americans weeks agone, to shelter in place. Something else is afoot. In Red China and Italia, the air is now strikingly clean. Venice's Grand Canal, normally fouled by boat traffic, is running clear. In Seattle, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta, the fog of pollution is lifted. Even global carbon emissions have fallen. Coronavirus has led to an astonishing shutdown of economic activity and a drastic reduction in the use of fossil fuels. In the Communist Chinese Empire, measures to contain the virus in February alone caused a drop in carbon emissions of an estimated 25%. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air estimates that this is equivalent to 200 million tons of carbon dioxide, more than half the annual emissions of Britain. In the short term, response to the pandemic seems to be having a positive effect on emissions. But in the longer term, will the virus help or harm the climate? To be clear, the coronavirus pandemic is a tragedy, a human nightmare unspooling in overloaded hospitals and unemployment offices with unnerving speed, barreling toward a horizon darkened by economic disaster and crowded with portents of suffering to come. But this global crisis is also an inflection point for that other global crisis, the slower one with even higher stakes, which remains the backdrop against which modernity, or rather postmodernity, now plays out. As the United Nations Secretary General so recently noted, the threat from coronavirus is temporary, whereas the threat from heat waves, flood, and extreme storms resulting in the loss of human life will remain with us for years. Our response to this health crisis will shape the climate crisis for decades to come. The efforts to revive economic activity, the stimulus plans, bailouts, and back-to-work programs being developed now will determine or help to determine the shape of our economies and our lives for the foreseeable future. And they will have effects on carbon emissions that reverberate across the planet for thousands of years. How hopeful you feel about the direction this response is taking may depend on how long ago you refreshed your news feed. Just yesterday or the week before that, which feels like 100 years agone in coronavirus crisis time, a friend suggested that there may be a sort of Freudian transference from coronavirus to climate, that the fear and sense of urgency will be lifted from the faster-moving crisis and settle on the slower one, becoming a catalyst for much-needed action. So far, it seems any transference is working in the opposite direction. Lockdowns and social distancing are providing a litany of necessary actions ripe for the transferal of nebulous climate anxieties and fears. In this context, consumerism perversely provides some relief. You can finally go buy dry goods to prepare for the apocalypse. But personal consumption and travel habits are, in fact, changing, which has some people wondering if this might be the beginning of a meaningful shift. Maybe as you hunker down with cabinets full of essentials, your sense of what consumer goods you need will shrink. Maybe, even after the acute phase of the coronavirus crisis has passed, you will be more likely to telecommute. Lifestyles that include, for example, frequent long-distance travel already seem ethically questionable in light of the climate crisis. and in an age irrevocably scarred by pandemic, these lifestyles may come to be seen as grossly irresponsible. Maybe among the relatively wealthy, jumping on a plane for a weekend away or for a destination wedding will come to seem unthinkable. Sweeping changes in individual habits, particularly in wealthy countries with high per capita consumption, could lead to lower emissions, which would be an unequivocal good. But personal habits may matter less because of direct reductions in carbon emissions and more because of behavioral contagion, a term from the social sciences, that I learned from the social engineering of Michael Aquino, that refers to the way ideas and behaviors spread through a population and can, in terms of climate action, lead to changes in voting and even policy. Which is to say, in order to be meaningful for global emissions, changes in consumption habits are, as a result of the virus, would need to extend beyond individuals to the larger structures that shape our lives. In communist China, it wasn't telecommuting or grounded planes that led to the 25% drop in emissions. It was the abrupt halt of industrial manufacturing. The concept of the personal carbon footprint was popularized by BP, or British Petroleum, in a 2005 media campaign costing over $100 million United States dollars, a campaign that, research has indicated, deflected responsibility for climate change away from the corporation and onto the individual consumer. This is not to say that personal consumption is meaningless. A significant reduction in air travel could decrease aviation emissions, but aviation accounts for only about 2.5% of global emissions, an amount that looks downright puny by the shadow cast by heavy industry. If anything, the short-term positive effects on the climate that we're seeing today serve as a dramatic reminder that changing personal consumption habits will mean very little going forward if we also fail to decarbonize the global economy. Of course, there's good reason for concern that despite the clean air and canals of the past 3 weeks, that if we also fail as humans on the other side of this equation, then we fail the future. We fail our children and their children. We fail the planet. Of course, there's good reason for concern that despite the clean air and canals of the past 3 weeks, or a month at this point, coronavirus may be a disaster for the climate. According to the oil trading firm Trafigura, coronavirus may lead to global oil demand seeing its biggest contraction in history, perhaps by more than 10 million barrels per day. While this may be good news for carbon emissions now, it signals a human disaster of epic proportions that is upon us, sans any guarantee that emissions will remain low. Yes, we could see a sustained emissions drop as economies stagnate and people struggle with the harsh daily realities of a global recession. But there were also dips in emissions during the 2008 financial crisis and the oil shocks of the 1970s, and emissions bounced back as economies recovered. The current crisis is different, to be sure, but after the acute phase passes, industrial production and carbon emissions are likely to ramp back up. A global recession as a result of coronavirus shutdowns could also slow or stall the shift to clean energy. If capital markets lock up, it will become difficult for companies to secure financing for planned solar, wind, and electric grid projects. And it could take proposals for new projects, Renewable energy projects around the world are already stumbling because of disruptions to the global supply chain. A huge share of the world's solar panels, wind turbines, and lithium-ion batteries are produced in China. Going forward, a shutdown of trade between Red China and the United States, for economic or political reasons, would also hit these projects hard. The clean energy analyst Bloomberg NEF has already downgraded its 2020 expectations for the solar, battery, and electric vehicle markets, signaling a slowdown in the clean energy transition when we urgently need it to speed up. If oil prices stay low, that could be bad news for the climate too. Falling demand has converged with skittish investors spooked by the pandemic, and with an oil price and production war between Russia and Saudi Arabia just all too recently coming to some kind of a ceasefire. Cheaper energy oftentimes leads consumers to use it less efficiently. Low prices could help depress electric vehicle sales and make people less inclined toward projects like retrofitting homes and offices to save energy. Coronavirus is bad for the climate even on the most macro levels. Lockdowns and social distancing have slowed climate research around the world or ground it to a halt. NASA is on mandatory telework. Research flights to the Arctic have been stopped, and field work everywhere is being canceled. No one knows how much climate data will never be collected as a result, or when research might even be able to start up again. Gatherings of world leaders to address the climate crisis also have been delayed or even canceled. And the COP26, the climate summit in Glasgow, planned for November, could be next, meaning climate talks at a time when, under the Paris Agreement, countries are supposed to announce new pledges to reduce emissions. Such a derailment would make it even more likely that countries would blow past warming limit goals. Going forward, public attention is likely to be diverted from the climate by ballooning fears over health and finances, and climate activism that depends on large public protests being forced indoors and online. There is a world in which stimulus measures could outweigh short-term impacts on energy and emissions, driving emissions up over the long term. This is what happened in Communist China after the 2008 global economic crisis. Already, China is indicating that it will relax environmental supervision of companies to stimulate its economy in response to coronavirus shutdowns, which means that an astonishing 0.25% cut in carbon emissions could evaporate, followed by even more emissions than ever before. In these United States, we could see similarly short-sighted recovery packages aiming to ramp up the economy to pre-pandemic levels that double down on soaring carbon emissions. So far, the American government's aid legislation has failed to address clean energy, or the package in modern American history includes, well, let's put it this way. So far, the American government's aid legislation has failed to address clean energy or the climate. And the $2 trillion United States dollar stimulus bill passed by Congress just 14 nights ago, the largest fiscal stimulus package in modern American history, or postmodern rather, includes direct payments to individuals, expanded and extended unemployment payments, and 500 billion United States dollars in loans to bail out affected industries. It does not include relief for renewables, such as crucial tax credit extensions for solar and wind. This isn't likely to be the last stimulus. Already there be talk of the next phase of economic relief, and climate and clean energy advocates are looking to future legislation that might aim to relieve specific industries. The two biggest wild cards for climate going forward are how policymakers respond to the threat of a global recession, and how the pandemic changes political will for climate action around the world. Prime Minister Andrej Babis of the Czech Republic has already said that the European Green Deal, a new policy package that commits European Union member states to zero emissions by 2050, should be set aside so that countries can focus on fighting the pandemic. This week has also seen a chilling shift in conservative denial rhetoric around the virus that echoes all too familiar patterns of climate denialism, suggesting that a more dangerous sort of transference is taking place. As the climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe wrote on Twitter, the 6 stages of climate denial are: it's not real, it's not us, it's not that bad, it's too expensive to fix, aha, here's a great solution that, in parentheses, actually does nothing, and oh no, now it's too late. You really should have warned us earlier. There is another world in which policymakers and politicians planning for economic recovery decide to make building a carbon-neutral society a priority. Because while the new reality could easily drain political will and funding from efforts to address the climate crisis, it could also inject a sense of urgency at a time when politicians are suddenly willing to spend vast sums of money. In this world, governments would create meaningful jobs in areas such as education, medical care, housing, and clean energy, with an emphasis on shovel-ready projects that put people to work immediately. The United States government, for example, could continue to provide jobs as needed. The program would expand during recession and contract when the economy recovered and people could find work elsewhere. As Kate Aronoff writes in The New Republic, one possible benefit to such a program is that it could provide an alternative to low-paid work bound up in carbon-intensive supply chains, like those at McDonald's and Walmart. Currently, the only employment on offer in many communities around the country. This approach would address the climate crisis with the urgency it demands, while also addressing the immediate needs of workers who will be laid off or have hours reduced because of shutdowns. Rather than seeing the clean energy transition stall, such an approach could jumpstart it, while also stimulating the economy. Governments drive more than 70% of global energy investments, and recovery plans could shift those investments as well as include new clean energy technologies. As Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, recently pointed out, the drop in oil prices also offers an opportunity for countries around the world to lower or remove subsidies for fossil fuel consumption, which disproportionately line the pockets of wealthy individuals and corporations with money that could go over to education, health care, or clean energy projects. These are, of course, more radical policy interventions that could improve the health of the planet, our communities, and our lives. There be such as adopting a 32-hour work week in these United States, which could lower emissions and vastly improve the quality of American life. It's unlikely we will see a 4-day work week anytime soon, but the profound disruptions of the pandemic provide a rare opportunity, even in the midst of great suffering, for rewiring our sense of what is possible in American society. Maybe the rupture caused by shelter-in-place orders provide us a glimpse of what work is essential to society: care work, education, and food distribution. Maybe it offers a glimpse, distorted though it may be, of what life might be like if we all went to work a little less. A best outcome might include a rethinking of the social contract that helps protect and provide for the most vulnerable members of society at a time of increasing risk. We need to ask, what does a government owe to its people? The climate crisis has already demonstrated that the way our societies and economies are organized be completely unsustainable on a planet of finite resources. And as people face increasing and unevenly distributed climate risk, it is reasonable to wonder what sort of support we can expect from our government. When your community is in crisis, how will your government respond? You see, the pandemic is a gut-wrenching reality check. The crushing blows of the coronavirus pandemic, like those of the climate crisis, will be felt hardest by our most vulnerable populations: the poor, the elderly, the homeless, the stateless, the incarcerated, and the precariously employed, while international corporations driven by the logics of profit and endless growth to seek new markets, cheap labor, and what the sociologist Jason Moore has called cheap nature, thereby connecting the world and helping create the conditions for crisis, will most likely remain relatively protected. The new coronavirus spread through the activity of global markets, and it remains to be seen whether we can respond to this crisis sans relying on and reinforcing the same market logics that got us into this mess. Rather, to face the profound challenges of pandemics, of which this coronavirus will not be the last, as well as the threat of climate change, to survive and even flourish on this interconnected planet, we have to learn to subordinate the needs of the market to our own needs. It'd be tempting to say that humans are a pox upon the earth, as Jameson Reese would essentially take that stance, and I've been there myself. It's tempting to fall into the trap that where we recede as the human species, nature rebounds. When images of dolphins and swans appearing in newly clear Venice canals popped up on social media, it was easy to believe, though it was not entirely true, that the virus had forced people indoors and nature had recovered in our absence. This is the wrong climate lesson to take from the pandemic. It's the lesson of Chernobyl, which is radiated and reclaimed by nature. Humans are part of nature, not separate from it. And human activity that hurts the environment also hurts us. In communist China, just 12 months of reduced pollution is likely to have saved the lives of 4,000 children under the age of 5 and 73,000 adults over the age of 70. As calculated with quite a bit of evidence by Marshall Burke, assistant professor in Stanford's Earth System Science Department. Perhaps the real question is not whether the virus is good or bad for climate, or whether rich people will take fewer airplane flights, or whether we can create a functioning economy that supports people without threatening life on Earth, including our own. Perhaps the real question is whether or not we can maintain a sense of direction that will guide us into the new age of human renaissance, in tune with nature and not at odds with nature, in which human beings begin to accept that they themselves are nature. And that is what can possibly take us to the future in a manner that will maintain nature under our guidance, under our supervision, under our garden keeping, as opposed to some kind of conquest. It would be a situation of cooperation with the Great Mother, on whose bosom we all reside and dwell. That would be future worth living. A future worth striving for. And a future we could be proud of to gift unto our grandchildren. Now, all of my actions, reactions, they're my struggle, mein Kampf. And mein Kampf, my struggle, be thine own. Contribute to the struggle at DouglasDietrich.com, where we now be accepting contributions via PayPal Holdings Incorporated on DouglasDietrich.com. All due acknowledgement be unto our own personal hero, our dearest English brother in battle, who be Team Thrax. Dietrich's our Dragon's ultimate post-episodic producer, and our final productions archivist at DouglasDietrich.com, as well as the YouTube Maggot Channel property manager, John Henry McMills Warrington. Friend and follow he via his Facebook timeline at facebook.com/John.War, and subscribe to youtube.com/C/Magateur, which be spelled MAGGOTAUR, for word no for he. Now all videographic works of the internationally recognized renegade military historian would have been lost. This is, of course, because our man John Warrington has preserved myself as a persona on the venues within the matrix of cyberspace, and he did this by personally taking the initiative to save all records of myself in videographic format. And during the multiple times the efforts were made to destroy my existence on the internet, this man has always established them on his own personal high drives. And therefore, he is, in a very real sense, the bridge between the Akashic records and the terrestrial dimension of the material plane of existence, Kabbalistically referenced as Malkuth. And because my virtual persona, that which exists on the internet, would not be here without him, he can readily be referenced as my creator. And now you too can do your part to help in the fight against